All right, good morning. We begin this hour with another campaign promise that Donald Trump is working but struggling to fulfill. Here he was in 2023.
I am your warrior. I am your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
A second term of retribution was promised, but retribution is technically punishment for some wrongdoing. What Trump is actually serving up is spite, and his perceived enemies, particularly those who spearheaded criminal and civil investigations into Trump's own alleged misconduct, have been targeted with lawsuits and indictments. Trump has demanded the Attorney General Pam Bondi essentially seek revenge on his behalf. And people have suffered as a result of this agenda of spite, but it's hit some serious snags. Career prosecutors who were reported to have refused to pursue cases against Trump's perceived enemies based on lack of evidence were removed or sidelined. The lawyers who have taken their place, many of them personal attorneys for Trump and other close allies, have treated the president's wishes with more zeal, but with considerably less skill. This week, a grand jury declined to indict Tish James for allegations of mortgage fraud. Grand juries are known to typically follow a prosecutor's lead and issue indictments, so much so that a New York judge once said that a jury would, quote, indict a ham sandwich. And yet on Thursday, the grand jury chose not to indict James. A source told MS Now, quote, there should be no premature celebrations by James, but this marked the second time that the Justice Department's case against her has failed to land. The first was last week when a judge ruled that Lindsay Halligan, a former insurance lawyer and personal attorney for Trump after his first term, appointed by him as interim U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, was not lawfully appointed to that role in the first place and therefore could not prosecute the case. The judge wrote, quote, this case presents the unique, if not unprecedented, situation where an unconstitutionally appointed prosecutor exercising power she did not lawfully possess acted alone in conducting a grand jury proceeding and securing an indictment. Unique and unprecedented, except for the fact that it's happened twice in a month. The case against Comey, also pursued by Lindsay Halligan, was dismissed by the same judge for the same reason. But even before that, the prosecution was beset with issues. They charged Comey on 3 counts, including lying to Congress, but the grand jury rejected one of those counts, so Halligan simply removed the unsuccessful count from the document, presented it to just 2 members of the grand jury, and presumed it successful. The full grand jury never saw or voted on the final document that they supposedly signed off on. While the DOJ immediately vowed to appeal the decision to dismiss Comey's case, it has yet to do so. And a new ruling last night by a federal judge will delay any attempt to recharge Comey using the same evidence that the original indictment was based on. Halligan is not the only federal prosecutor deemed to be serving unlawfully. This week, a federal appeals court ruled that another Trump personal attorney, Alina Habba, was also serving unlawfully in her role as U.S. attorney in New Jersey. If I had a nickel for every time a personal attorney of Donald Trump's with no prosecutorial experience was ruled to have been unlawfully appointed as a federal prosecutor, I'd have 2 nickels. It's not a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. Failure, however, is unlikely to dissuade them because Donald Trump has made it very clear that his retribution campaign is a priority. If you remember, in a September social media post, the president directed the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to prosecute Senator Adam Schiff and Letitia James. Quote, Pam, I've reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that essentially same old story as last time. All talk, no action. Nothing is being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia? They're all guilty as hell, but nothing is going to be done. We can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. They impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now. It was reported to be mistakenly posted, by the way. It was intended instead to be a direct message to the Attorney General. The important thing to ask, though, is what was the accusation that Trump was making? He mentions no crime in the post itself. They've had to get creative, and their favorite instrument has become mortgage fraud. Apart from James and Senator Schiff, California Representative Eric Swalwell and Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook have all been referred to the DOJ for alleged mortgage fraud. All of them deny wrongdoing. Joining me now is Lisa Rubin, MS Now senior legal reporter, former litigator, and host of the podcast Can They Do That? Which is apropos of our topic today. And Catherine Christian, MS Now legal analyst and former Manhattan assistant district attorney. Welcome. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for being here. Catherine, you and I had this conversation, particularly about Alina Habba. You said there are really very clear ways of appointing these people, and the administration didn't follow those clear ways. It wasn't done right. You're not particularly surprised by this.
I'm not surprised at all. And also, quite frankly, ethical, competent attorneys don't participate in retribution campaigns. They don't participate in vindictive prosecutions. There are very clear ethical obligations for prosecutors. You do not prosecute a case where you do not have evidence that you believe proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. So I'm not surprised at all that you can call them missteps are happening, because lawyers who are skilled, competent, and ethical know you cannot argue something that is not based in law and fact.
So, Lisa, let's parse this a little bit, because there are kind of two issues. One is these two people were unlawfully appointed. But there are 340 million people in America. You can find people and ways to get someone who's probably got some fealty to you lawfully appointed. Then question two becomes what Catherine just said. Can you do these things even if you're lawfully appointed? Because somebody will be appointed in Alina Habba's case, in Lindsay Halligan's case. Will they do the same thing again?
Well, let's start with, can they be appointed? Because the answer is actually no. The federal statute at issue here basically says that a president, when faced with a vacancy in a U.S. attorney's position, can appoint someone through the attorney general to serve for 120 days.
Right.
With both Alina Habba and Lindsay Halligan, courts found that the president and the attorney general had long passed that 120-day deadline, and you couldn't just use 120 days upon 120 days upon 120 days. So can they put somebody in that position now? These courts have essentially said the answer is no. The only way out, and there are two, is either the president does what we're used to him doing, nominate someone and have the Senate confirm that person, or the district judges in each of these districts can together and collectively appoint someone to serve as an interim U.S. attorney. And there are a couple of instances of that happening across the country. For example, here in Manhattan, Jay Clayton, who is the interim U.S. attorney, he was originally appointed by the attorney general, but he's been extended in that position by the judges of the Southern District of New York. So there's no impediment to his continuing to serve there. So I don't think that the administration can simply find another Alina Habba or Lindsay Halligan. But to your second point is, can they actually do the things that they were doing? I think the answer to that is going to be no, but the process itself, as you alluded to, is the punishment, because in order to be able to show that those charges are ill-founded, where you don't have internal guardrails from the people acting at the Department of Justice, what does a criminal defendant do? The defendant has to move to dismiss an indictment, or be lucky enough, as Tish James was earlier this week, to have a grand jury say, no, we're not going to vote to indict you because we have real concerns about the charges that were brought before us by a career prosecutor, not Lindsay Halligan herself. She brought in somebody from the Eastern District of Missouri, somebody who'd been in that position for 3 decades, and yet even he could not find a way to get Tish James, who is nobody's ham sandwich, indicted.
Let's talk about this concept, Catherine, of one of the ways in which the president can do this, and that is appointing somebody who goes through Senate approval. At this point, I don't think a lot of people pay a whole lot of attention to Senate approval for these types of positions, except they will, right? If that's the way Donald Trump wants to go on this thing, it now becomes the responsibility of senators in a hearing to ask these very questions of these appointees.
Exactly. And as Lisa made the point, Jay Clayton was appointed by the district court in the Southern District. Why? Because he has a good reputation as being professional and competent. So you pick a lawyer who has prosecutorial experience, who has a good professional reputation. You bring them to the Senate and let them be vetted. What is the fear? The problem is, if you don't have someone who has that experience, then clearly you don't want them to be asked questions, because they probably will not be able to answer them, just even the basic rules of federal criminal procedure. So if done properly, it will work. The problem is, the catch-22, I guess, for the administration is, if you want a loyalist, and it doesn't matter whether or not they have criminal law experience or prosecutorial experience, you don't want them to be answering questions because they won't be able to answer those questions. So you just try to violate the rules by appointing someone who, as we saw as the court has said in 2 different cases, have been appointed unlawfully.
I'm going to ask you both to stick around for a second. We're going to take a quick break and continue this conversation on the other side. You're watching Velshi on MS Now. I'm back with Lisa Rubin, MS Now senior legal reporter, and Catherine Christian, MS Now legal analyst. We were just talking in the break, Lisa, about how your podcast is called Can They Do That? But the question might be, will they do that, or are they doing that? Because here's what the New York Times had to say about Lindsay Halligan acting as U.S. Attorney. The Office of Legal Counsel has told department officials that because Judge Curry's order did not require a specific measure to be taken, like removing Ms. Halligan, she could stay even though the judge declared her appointment invalid, the People said.
That is flabbergasting to me. I mean, as this administration continues, Ali, I continue to run out of hyperbole. I'm going to have to find some new words.
Yes.
But the import of that decision, and really there are two, right? Judge Curry ruled in both the Comey and James cases. The import of that decision that she had no manner in which she could be lawfully appointed as of the dates of both of those indictments to be U.S. Attorney.
In a normal person's world, that would be ... hence you can't be in that job.
Right? It's like a mathematical equation.
Yes.
Therefore,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
The idea that she is continuing to call herself U.S. Attorney in court filings that line prosecutors are signing and other new criminal cases, she is listed as Lindsay Halligan, U.S. Attorney and Special Attorney. That just boggles my mind because her office has neither appealed the dismissal of either the Comey or James indictments, nor have they sought a stay of Judge Curry's order declaring her appointment invalid. There is no universe absent either of those things where she is entitled to call herself the U.S. Attorney. I don't care how many times the Office of Legal Counsel puts pen to paper and says that is true. That is simply not the law. And this is one of yet another examples of this administration sort of flagrantly flouting an existing court order, all the while saying that the judges are the ones who are lawless and need to be impeached. Again, it's the upside down. Yeah,
Catherine, that's kind of disturbing because we talk a lot about how a lot of these judges are, doing the right thing and standing up for the Constitution and following the law. What happens then when the administration just doesn't listen?
That's the problem, because basically it's sort of like it didn't happen. Oh, let's just ignore the fact that she's not really the U.S. Attorney. What's going to happen are the defendants, and there are other defendants who are being prosecuted in that district, are going to have to appeal and say, wait a minute, we are being prosecuted by an office that is headed by someone who a court just said shouldn't be heading the office. So that's what's going to happen. And ultimately, this will go to the Supreme Court. But as Lisa said, they didn't even appeal the decision. They just sort of said, we're ignoring it. But those other defendants who are now being prosecuted in that office, their attorneys, I guarantee you, are going to be filing motions to dismiss their indictments because they are being indicted by someone who a court just said shouldn't be in that position.
Right. That's the part I know from Law and Order, right? That if you're not legally in your position and you prosecute me, then sort of everything you've ever done as a prosecutor comes into question. These are not the only two examples.
No, they're not the only two examples, but I will say that Alina Habba and Lindsay Halligan are sort of differently situated. Lindsay Halligan's case, she was the only person from her office who went into the grand jury, presented to the grand juries, signed an indictment. And that, according to Judge Curry, makes both of those indictments facially invalid. But in other areas of the country, including with Alina Habba, you've got somebody who has been judged to be invalidly appointed, but smartly didn't go and make those presentations by themselves, didn't sign the indictments. It means that the indictments aren't necessarily invalid, but the Third Circuit has now upheld a judgment in Alina Habba's case that essentially says she can't continue to supervise cases. And if line prosecutors, meaning career officials in the Department of Justice, continue to act under her supervision, they run the risk that their future actions will also be invalidated. So you and I were talking during the break. Lindsay Halligan, Alina Habba are two examples of this, but there are two more judges who have been adjudged to be appointed unlawfully. Sigal Chattah.
Two more prosecutors.
I'm sorry, two more prosecutors. Sorry for misspeaking. Sigal Chattah in the District of Nevada and Bill Asaley in the Central District of California. That's the Los Angeles metropolitan area. There are also two more who are about to walk into similar proceedings, including a guy in the Northern District of New York. That's the Albany area. His name is John Sarcone, and he has an active investigation of his own against Letitia James in the Office of the Attorney General that was subject of a court proceeding on Friday, where that judge suggested he cannot continue to even issue subpoenas in aid of his investigation. Why? Because like these other women, he was too invalidly appointed.
So, Catherine, philosophically, if I were Donald Trump and I did want to go after my perceived enemies, Why do it this way? Why do it in a way that's legally dubious? Why not actually find, again, in a population of 340 million people, why not get this done the right way, or at least what seems like the right way, so that there isn't a danger that later on down the road some court overturns a prosecution attempt?
I would argue because the right way would be a prosecutor looking at the facts and saying, sir, I'm sorry, there is no crime here. We cannot prosecute. So that's the problem. If you're
There's no right way.
There's no right way if the facts do not prove that there's a crime in the law. So obviously, you know, someone who has committed a crime and it's provable beyond a reasonable doubt should be prosecuted. But if you're just choosing people because they're your perceived enemies, even if they committed a crime, quite frankly, that's improper because you're being vindictive, you're targeting, you're singling them out. So that's the problem. And it might also be, in terms of the administration, it's not really the result, it's the process. You're really mucking with someone's life when you indict them. They have to get an attorney. They have to go to court.
Yes.
Okay, it's dismissed. We'll move on. You know, so in many ways, it has nothing to do with whether or not there's going to be a guilty verdict. It's just that we have now disrupted this perceived enemy's life.
Right, right. And so, like in the case of the mortgages, Lisa, there are 4 people. They have to get lawyers who can argue these cases. For the rest of society, these may not even seem like serious matters, but for the person facing those charges, this is a very big deal.
It's a very big deal, in large part because some of these people are current office holders or federal officials. And by rules and regulations, they can accept free legal advice. So they are paying out of their pocket for the high-powered attorneys that they have, and many of them have been career public servants. They don't have extensive, exhaustive resources, a la defendant Donald Trump, to back them up. So one thing I want to suggest to you is the hero of this situation ultimately may come to be a guy named Henry Hyde, who's a now deceased Illinois congressman. He placed into law in 1997 a provision that says if you have been vexatiously prosecuted or prosecuted in bad faith by the federal government and you turn out to be the victor, you can sue the government for your attorney's fees and costs. Let's see if that comes to pass with any of these people, because at the end of the day, the process is the punishment, but these folks may ultimately have the last laugh as against the Department of Justice.
Thank you to both of you. Appreciate it. Lisa Rubin, MS Now legal correspondent, and Catherine Christian, MS Now legal analyst. All right, coming up, the affordability crisis has not spared the middle class. What's once seemed like an attainable, comfortable life is now out of reach for so many Americans. The Brookings Institute's Andre Perry joins me with his brand new research showing just how elusive the middle income life has become. If you consider yourself part of the middle class, but you also feel like you're getting squeezed financially, you're definitely not alone. Being a middle-income earner in America used to mean that you could live a pretty comfortable life. You could own a home and a car, have your pantry stocked properly, have your utilities paid, and have enough money left over for an occasional vacation. You could raise a family. But these days, you may see yourself or someone you know in this middle-income woman about whom the Boston Globe wrote last month. Quote, Alexa Arena, a 35-year-old college-educated professional, moved in with her parents to save on rent. Though she works full-time, the classic trappings of a middle-class life, the kind she had growing up, now feel out of reach. I don't even know what the middle is anymore, she said. I've been living basically paycheck to paycheck, end quote. Her story is one of the reasons the issue of affordability has resonated so deeply, because it's not just affecting low-income Americans, it's cutting deeply into the middle class. This week, a report from the Brookings Institution using the latest available data found that, quote, 1/3 of the American middle class cannot afford the cost of basic necessities as of 2023. The report analyzed 160 metro areas across the country and found that in every one of them, quote, a household defined by income as middle class may not feel they are middle class as they struggle to make ends meet, even in more affordable metro areas. This is not about the coastal cities or geography. Predictably, the middle class is especially squeezed in parts of California, in New England, and the Pacific Northwest, but also in sections of Alabama, Florida, and the Carolinas. The report also found large racial disparities. When it comes to the number of households struggling to afford necessities, quote, white middle-class families have the lowest share at 27%, while Latino and Hispanic middle-class families have the highest, with 50% struggling to make ends meet. These racial disparities indicate that while the middle class is facing affordability issues overall, white families are more likely than non-white families to be able to afford basic necessities such as housing and food, end quote. Joining me now is one of the authors of the report, Andre Perry. He's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a professor of practice of economics at Washington University in St. Louis. His work focuses on race, structural inequality, and education. He's also the author of Black Power Scorecard, Measuring the Racial Gap and What We Can Do to Close It. Dr. Perry, great to see you again. Thank you for being with us.
Always a pleasure.
Let's talk about this, because I think this concept, the idea of middle class, it's not just a concept, it's numerical, right? It's people who are in the middle of the income range. That used to be a real thing. It used to mean certain things about the so-called American dream: affordability, housing, owning a house, owning a car, getting your kid an education, if it's perhaps at a state school, a state university, getting a vacation, having a life. Your research indicates that lots and lots of Americans who fall into the middle income cannot afford that.
That's exactly right. There's many ways to define the middle class. As you stated, a lot of people look at what school you attended, whether or not you own a home. But for consistency's sake, economists and others generally look at people within the middle of the income distribution. If you lined up everyone's income in a line and you look down the middle, around the 60th percentile is what we define as the middle class. And we just assume that you can meet cost of living with that income. And specifically, I'm talking about transportation, childcare, healthcare, housing, taxes, and other necessities like clothes. Because we generally assume if you're in the middle class, you'll be not only be able to take care of yourself, you'll be able to pass on some wealth to your children at some point. But we found that there are no cities in the United States where 100% of the middle class can afford basic necessities. So it really gets to that question: what is the middle class? Is it in the middle of the distribution, or is it the ability to afford basic cost of living goods and services?
So this is very important, because the word affordability has come up a lot. Donald Trump sometimes says he's all about it. Sometimes he says it's a hoax. But fundamentally, it's central to the idea of whether Americans feel that they're in the middle class or not. And this was reflected in the elections last month, that a whole lot of people were spending too much of their income. These are earners who are spending too much of their income on the basics, like housing and transportation. This wasn't ideological. This was people who say, I can't afford my life.
Yeah, and we can actually add this up. Actually, the Economic Policy Institute has a basic, a family budget calculator that calculates the cost of housing, food, transportation, childcare, healthcare, and other necessary goods. So we essentially just line up how middle income family, how much they earn against how much it costs. And mind you that the cost of living varies across place to place. The cost of living in Youngstown is very different than in San Francisco. So families in that middle income range vary. So in many parts of the world, in Pittsburgh, for instance, parts of D.C., it's slightly more affordable than in the West Coast. But you mentioned something. This is not just about the superstar cities. This is also about places like Salinas, California. And if you know Salinas, it's just a bedroom community, a suburb, if you will, where a great deal, about half of all middle class residents can't afford basic living expenses. So this is I would say this is a crisis. If you are saying that people in the middle of the income distribution can't afford basic goods and services, then we're seriously in trouble.
So maybe my numbers are out of date, but I used to think as an economics journalist that if you pay more than, your biggest expense is typically housing, and if you pay more than 40% of your income in housing, that gets dangerous. But there are places, like you said, San Francisco or New York, where that's going to be the case. I want to return to that story about Alexa Arena. The Boston Globe was writing about her, and they say she has a master's degree and works as an assistant director at Boston University. After being priced out of subsidized housing in Somerville, she moved in with her parents in Peabody before finally moving into a one-bedroom in Cambridge. She now spends half her monthly income on rent. Okay, so talk to me about that. 50% of her monthly income on rent. Is that still thought to be too much, or is that the new reality?
That's the new reality, but it's still too much. There's just not enough discretionary income to put towards other things. Now, mind you, you mentioned she went to college or university. I'm assuming that she had to take on student loan debt to go along with that. So when you take on debt, obviously the money you expend to paying those loans back are reducing the amount you could put towards housing, put towards transportation and childcare and the like. So we're talking about a need to change what we consider our social safety net. The things that we should not probably pay as much for, things like health care, higher education, the very things that we say that are basic and necessary. We're going to have to figure out a way to either subsidize those, or the other end of the equation is we got to increase income so that people can meet the cost of living. So there's no way around this. Either you're going to reduce the cost of living or raise incomes.
Right.
And you can do that in many ways, either through policy or by cutting the check.
All right, well, as the assistant deputy booking producer on my show, I'm going to book you to have that conversation. We're going to have another conversation about potential solutions and discuss what other countries have done and what even in the United States may have been successful. Andre, we always appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. Andre Perry is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. All right, coming up, 1 minute he's, quote, sharper than he was 25 years ago. The next minute he's seemingly asleep during a cabinet meeting. Not quite the American dream we were promised. The White House wants you to believe this isn't a problem. I'm here to tell you why it very much is.